Hi. So this recorded PowerPoint presentation is going to show you how to do a PowerPoint presentation. So if you think about it, feel free to assess and evaluate how I do things. And you may, in the light of this presentation, decide that I could have improved the way I did it. And that's all to the good. If you can if you can assess my presentation, then you can help develop and make your own the best it can be. Okay. When you present, it's an oral and it's a visual version of your understanding. All assessments are about getting across how much you've understood from a module, how much you've learned, how much you're able to apply it, and to what depth and degree you can do that. So a presentation is therefore an oral and visual representation of this, and it's important that you understand that even though it's different in this sense, there are similarities and differences between that and a normal piece of academic writing or a normal presentation in assessment. So the differences are, in a presentation, the language will be different. The depth of content will vary, and the visual content obviously will get a big lift because arguably there is more in the slides. If you have slides, you have anything visual that you're going to use, then that's going to add a different dimension to your presentation. Going back to language will be less formal because you are conversational. One of the things I would strongly advise you to not do is to read off a page, and certainly not to read something which has been written academically, because that will in actual fact not lend itself to a presentation. The thing about a presentation is the language that is used can be and will be more accessible and will be slightly different because it's been spoken. The word written to be read and the word written to be spoken is different. So if you tackle this presentation and prepare a report and then read it out, it will be distinctly formal. When there are elements that you can add to this which would improve its accessibility, because you are trying to get across understanding, and in that respect you should be wary of how you get it across. The second thing is arguably the depth of content. There is a limit to the amount of detail that you can put into any presentation because of time constraints. So it's equally of importance that not to make the content too detailed, because you can't possibly get it all said in the time. And you certainly don't want to be rushing, because nothing will slow down your uptake, your engagement by the audience. You're talking too fast. When you talk too fast, then immediately you're losing them and they can't barely hear what you're saying, and it's lost and they've gone, and that's it. So the depth of content will be affected because of that, and it may be less than a written report, but that's not to say you can't get the key points over in a presentation. Okay. And as I said before, there is a visual element, and I will briefly mention that. The similarities, right? So we've got some similarities. Like any piece of academic work, it's got to be informative. It's got to deliver the points it should. And informative in a relevant way. So it's got to answer the question or the task that you've been given. So that's very important, and get that point across. So you've got to let the audience know what they need to know. It has to be clear and concise. Again, that comes down to the way that you articulate it, how you verbalize it, are all very important when you're giving a presentation. And also, not only verbally how you do it, but in terms of the language you use. And that ties in with what I said before in the previous, that although it changes, the language you use may change, it still has to be, you cannot be too relaxed, you cannot be too informal. There is a balance to be struck between getting your point across in a clear and concise way and perhaps being too informal and casual where certain points may be lost. And the third thing is, like any piece of academic work, it's got to be well structured. And I will be discussing this as we go. If you are anxious about your presentation, that's very understandable. It's absolutely understandable if you are anxious about your presentation. Now, a lot of anxiety comes from fear of the unknown. You fear something's going to happen when you present. You trip over your words. You don't move from one subject to the other smoothly. Lots of different things. You stuff, as I'm doing now, you're stumbling over your words. You lose your track of thought. You pause, whatever. These can all be addressed to a large extent with practice. So when you practice, you can eliminate a lot of the anxiety because you've been through it, dare I say, half a dozen times. That will take nothing away from your final presentation, but improve it no end. You wouldn't expect a symphony orchestra to appear at the Albert Hall and just say, "Hey guys, we've done this tune before. Let's just wing it." That's never going to work. That is never going to work. So they practice, they rehearse, and you should too. You should too. Okay. A few segments are, we're going to talk about what shapes your presentation. So what are the inputs that shape your presentation and what's involved in it? What is the structure of a good presentation? We won't bother with the structure of a bad presentation because I don't think that's really worth it. So we'll not go there. Also, the importance of signposting. Signposting within a presentation is a very useful tool to get this clarity and concise nature across. Okay, and then finally, I will have some key tips around presentations that I'll pass on, which you can use or ignore as you please. Okay, so what is the topic that you are discussing? Is it a very complex topic? Is it a simple topic? What you know to put in, that's what's there. That's the first thing is. So you've got a certain amount to present and the topic provides you with that. The second thing is the amount of time you have. That's a major thing as well. And that will restrict how much detail you can go into. You'll have a known amount that you want to communicate, but a limited amount of time to get that across. So it's always that balance between depth and breadth. To cover the whole thing in the time you're allowed, how much depth can you go into? So who is the audience? Well, the audience are actually other students. And I think there's a balance between getting across what you need to, but also taking the students with you, taking your fellow students with you, so that perhaps you could increase the complexity of your presentation, but lose the students in the process. So to my mind, you've got to try and phrase or conduct this presentation to suit that audience, so that by the end, hopefully they're going to sit down and say, "Do you know, I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from it because of the pace. I learned a lot of that because of the content." So they will have a, you know, when you keep them in mind, they will have an influence on how you, because in my mind, that's who you're playing to. But again, it's always a balance. You don't want to simplify it too much. Okay. So is this presentation to inform, persuade, educate, or to entertain? I would say it could be most of them. Certainly it's to inform, that goes without. To persuade, it depends on the question or the task you've been given. You may be given a discussion, in which case you may feel that the evidence suggests one side or the other, and you might make that point. Educate, absolutely. You want people to have a much better understanding of the subject after you're taught them before. So it is about educating and informing, to get across, so that when they leave, you've given your presentation in such a way that when they leave, there's like, I get it. And that ties back to who the audience is. And what do you want them to learn? No, what is it you want them to learn or know? What are the specific key takeaway points that you want them, because that also shapes your presentation. Okay, so all of these things, when you add all of those things, there are a few things to consider, but it's interesting how that, if you consider each of them and bring them to the table, they will have some impact on your content or delivery. So here are some key overarching principles of a good presentation. So having clear objectives, you know absolutely what you want to accomplish. It's easy to say you have to talk about this or you have to answer that. But from that, you should be able to develop, well, these are the key points I should get across. These are the key things that we should say. As I've said before, the takeaway points. If nothing else, you'll have learned this, this, and this. And then, obviously, and I do apologise, but some of this presentation will seem a bit kind of like, no shit, Sherlock, and I apologise for that, but sometimes people don't pick up on it. So having a clear plan that makes sense is another key thing, because you've got to work out in what order or how you're going to get those clear objectives across. How are you going to accomplish those objectives? Well, I'm going to do it in a certain way with this plan. Okay. And then you have the power of clear signals, verbal signals that connect, make connections between, create boundaries to finish off, to introduce. And these are really useful signals to help add structure in a verbal manner. Communicate with your audience. That seems simple, but if you don't talk clearly, like obviously I don't sometimes, if you mumble, if you go you're losing that. You're not communicating with your audience, and that's not good. And the other thing is to be yourself. You can be, if you practice and rehearse, you can be more yourself. You can be more relaxed than feeling under pressure and somebody's put a rod up your back and suddenly the words are struggling to come to you, and the important thing is this, you've got to be relaxed, you've got to be yourself. And if that has a certain style of delivery or whatever, it's not a bad thing, because it's engaging, because people are more liable to listen to you. Okay. Okay, so big structure. The big structure from your presentation is obviously going to be this beginning, this overview. This is what's happening, this introduction. This is what's coming. Then you've got your middle, main ideas, your arguments if you've got any, and that's got to be in a logical flow, and that's got to make links. Then, in the end, clearly concluded, thank the audience, possibly invite questions. Yeah, if that's going to happen on Collaborate Ultra, I'm sure Christine will tell you. Okay, maybe on the chat, maybe people will type in questions in the chat. Okay, so let's look at the beginning in more detail. Boom. Clear introduction to your talk. Today we are going to talk about this, that, and the next thing. Sorry, we're going to talk about this. Then you give an overview of the content and you're going to say, we're going to discuss this, we're going to discuss that, we'll touch on this, and this is it. And then at the same time, you will be saying, so firstly, we'll do this. Secondly, we'll do this. So the overview and the structure and the content can happen at the same time. Bullet points. First, second, third, fourth. We're going to speak for 15 minutes. We're going to speak for 10 minutes, just to give them an indication of how long they're going to be. They may be aware of this, but it's a good protocol to have. It's always a good habit to have, to say I'll be speaking for, and then they're aware. And obviously, again, if I do this quite a lot in this presentation, but questions at the end. Don't ask questions halfway through. Leave your questions to the end. So, and you're off and running. Now, in the middle, it's very important that everything moves along logically. Absolutely logical progression of ideas. And if you're coming to a conclusion or making a point on the way, then develop those and make sure that they follow as well. I'd say it's very useful, two reasons, very useful to have examples. The first one is it lets you show that you understand what you're talking about. So, especially in relation to theory. When you're talking about theory, it's you've got to get across that you understand what the theory is. And that's a task. But if you have clear examples, your examples, not the hackneyed examples out of the textbook, your more original examples, and you tie that example to the theory, then you're demonstrating that you understand what you're talking about. The connection of a really good example to explain a theory can make it clear, because it takes a certain amount of effort to get an example that matches it. So that would be really good. The second thing is, for people who are trying to digest theory, who are trying to look at theory and absorb it, then that's really useful for them too. So they are more liable to engage, they're more liable to understand, and they're more liable to take away, because you've added that extra level of understanding. And yes, there may be something on the slide that is useful to you or helps. And they can, as I say, they can help. Like an example, they can be illustrative, or they can make people think. So sometimes a good photograph, nothing decorative. You don't put anything decorative in a PowerPoint, everything in a presentation. If you have visuals, if you have slides, then you've got to have something that does something for you that helps your presentation. It's not just a pretty picture. Something that does stimulate. Then you get to the end, sum up your main points, reinforce that argument if you had one. If there are recommendations, this is not always the case. Recommendations are not always the case. But this is kind of in connection with this, but it's a general talk as well. Then finally, invite your questions. Thanks very much. Clearly conclude. That's us. Thanks very much. Really important. So the whole purpose of this ending is to bring it all together again and leave the person with those kind of main points, takeaway points, etc. Even though you have given them before, give yourself some time to consolidate that at the end. Don't just come to the end of a stop dead. You've got to give it some kind of ending to finish it off. And if you can pull it together and finish it off well, then you'll have a happy, satisfied audience. So here's some examples of signposting. Signposting is that kind of linking, verbal creating structure that's very useful. So, I'd like to give an overview of my presentation. Then we know what's coming. The audience knows what's coming, and that's really helpful because they stay with you. And then that's all for we've come to an end. That's all for my introduction. Now moving on. And then you can be pointed in separating and structuring the spoken word. So if we think about it, there's two main points to this. The first point is this. The second point is this. These, and also even perhaps counting on your fingers like I am, may be useful as well. But again, there's that. Always think about how can I tie this together. So that's not, for me, that's not excessive language. That's the right amount to help it make sense. So that's like one thing is these take away from what the actual points you're saying, but they lend to the structure. They lend to the clarity of the message, and they keep people with you. They keep saying, so we've started, we've finished, we're done. Look at these three things. These are all really important. And the last thing, obviously, that concludes my presentation, and I'll take questions at this point. It's like reinforcing the actions you're going to take with words. Yeah, I've said this before, but don't read word for word either. Even if I would maybe have prompt cards or I'd have ideas of what you're going to say, but I would always be trying to talk off the cuff. For this presentation, I have no notes, but I do make, funnily enough, you can't see it, but the slides are in the background as I talk, and I'll add the slides in later. But the important thing is it's all off the cuff, extemporaneous. And for that reason, I think it is more natural. There's a certain undulation in my tone. I can be pointed. And the other thing is that you can always use silence. That was only a couple of seconds. But if you were to do that at a certain point to give it emphasis, you would be surprised how much the lack of words can be as powerful as the spoken word. Avoid jargon. Yeah, well, yes. Avoid jargon if you can. That's, how do I put this? there is a way to say something and you can bring people along. But when you rely too heavily on jargon, then you will lose people. Now, with the subject you're talking about, there is a shared language. There's an expectation that when you talk about this subject, there are certain words and certain vocabulary that you have to use. Absolutely. You can't really avoid that. However, for every other word that's spoken, you can be inclusive, you can be engaging, and you can be clear. So you can make certain points, but you can also get them across without using too many technical words. If you can at all, yes, you've got to try and engage your audience. So that means it's difficult to do, but if you are, in fact, I'm not quite doing it here, but if I suddenly know this is me looking into the camera now, and I'll go back to the other way I was looking, but if you can do that for the whole presentation, wow, that locks people in. That gets people looking at you. It's as if you're staring. You have to realize that you're staring right at the people, staring into the camera. Also, yeah, if you can be a bit larger than life, it will feel awkward to you when you're presenting, but it will work, believe me. So, the example I would give is a child presenter, a child's program presenter, is this passion, this engagement. And it's interesting because for me, in their context, it's exactly what's needed when they say, "Good morning, kids. Do you know what we're going to do today? We're going to take this toilet roll and we're going to make this very interesting thing that you can give for your mum on Mother's Day. And all we'll need is..." Now, if you went down to your local supermarket and acted like that when you were talking to staff or whatever, "Wow, is this a checkout? Gosh, are you going to scan all my stuff? That's brilliant. I take it I'll need some..." There's a context for it, right? Absolutely. But I think presentations, you can be that bit more passionate, that bit more engaged, and it comes across and it works. Yes, so the absolute key thing, again, I'm going back through, but having a clear logical structure, making sense is as equally important as how you say it. The order you say it in is equally important, as well as what you're saying. Obviously, the content, when you look at the marking schedule, the content is 40%. So it's what you're saying is way more important than anything else. Or you're not going to save yourself if you do everything else very well, but your content misses. So if your content's not up to spec, it's going to affect your mark. However, when you see the smaller 10% for presentation, 5% for this, 10% for this, you realize that how you approach it and how you structure it, how you present it has an importance that can help. And all of those things can be improved through rehearsal. So, just to recap, the takeaway points. Remember what shapes your presentation, okay? The topic, the time you have, the audience, what are you trying to tell them? Make sure you've got the structure, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Understand the real usefulness of signposting the audience. And remember those useful tips I gave you at the end. Be enthusiastic. Be prepared to take... be prepared to take questions, my goodness. So you see that That was very poor of me there. That should have been, I brought in something completely new in the conclusion, and that's wrong. That should have been in the other slide. I'm not going to correct it. I'm not going to change the recording. I'm just going to show you that as a point of fact, that you've got to be meticulous with your slides to get it to be the best it can be. Luckily enough, nobody's given me any marks for this, so I'll take it on the chin. I'll just say it. I deliberately did it so you had something. Right. Thanks very much for watching today. If you have any questions, there's nothing I can do because this is a recording. Thanks very much for watching. Thank you.